about the only good thing that can be said about the events following the murder of the black teenager Stephen Lawrence in London 21 years ago is that British people care very deeply about getting to the truth of this horrible race crime. Well, this week we learned of alleged police corruption, documents being shredded, effectively a cover-up, and the use of undercover police to spy on the Lawrence family. Can we trust the police, and how does the image of the British Bobby compare with other countries? Were you shocked by all this week? It was pretty extraordinary stuff.
Yes, I was. I've never thought a great deal of the police in the sense that successive British governments have been too scared to tackle police reform. It's almost the one major British institution which has remained untouched, and it's the failure of successive governments to do this because they've always been frightened of the police. Police are a very formidable force, and inevitably there are within the police, like in any institution, some very corrupt people, and they've totally, particularly the Metropolitan Police, have been totally incapable, despite having some good commissioners over the years, of weeding out these people. So what has happened has shocked me, but it hasn't totally surprised me, because unfortunately the police, when they feel being threatened in some way, either by politicians or anyone else, they will fit you up, as they just fitted up one of
Andrew Mitchell,
exactly,
in Downing
who
Street.
threatened them? In my view, that's the story. He threatened them, and they thought, we'll get him first. So I think it is a shocking story, and the interesting thing to me now is, will this government, or indeed any future government, actually reform the police? Because actually it goes wider than corruption. The police are very inefficient. It is not a good service. They don't actually, the number of criminals they catch, the number of offences that are actually perpetrated, are a tiny percent.
Well, a senior police officer once said to me, the trouble with detectives is they don't detect enough. And
well,
that is one of the problems.
That's a fair point.
But it's something that honest police officers get.
Yes.
But
it's very sad, actually, because I mean, the whole force is being tarnished with this area of corruption, where it is a tiny minority of officers that are involved. But in the Stephen Lawrence case, of course, it wasn't just, of course, about corruption. It was also about, initially, about racism, and that has obviously tinged the whole inquiry. But I think the new shocking aspect of this particular revelation this week is that there was a corrupt detective who actually shredded evidence, prevented his superiors getting anywhere with it, and distorted the whole nature of the inquiry. But it goes much higher up, and I mean, obviously the present commissioner has only just arrived in post about a year ago, so he's not responsible, but some of his predecessors bear a large measure of responsibility for what's happened.
I mean, you mentioned that as being one of the most shocking things. I think for many people what was really shocking was the use of an undercover police officer to spy on the victims of a race crime. That is extraordinary.
It is extraordinary. On one hand, you know, I mean, the view from abroad is that the British Bobby is a wonderful person, you know, always civilised, polite, and absolutely not corrupted, like the BBC, the beacon of civilization. And in the last few years, unfortunately, that great reputation has been dented. And then, listening to you, I have the feeling that British police is not, you know, better than the French police. It's like a state within the state, and they do whatever they please.
Is police reform very difficult in France because it's such a great lobby, isn't it? And people on the left are desperate not to be seen to be soft on law and order, and people on the right are desperate to be seen to be tough on law and order.
Absolutely, except we don't have high expectations in France. You know, the police has always been operating. You know, in the background, and we almost admit and accept that it should be the case.
But we don't have that here. You have very high expectations, do we not?
You do. And what I find very interesting is the exercise of public inquiries in Britain, because okay, there's a case of corruption, something is really wrong. We're going to have a national public inquiry. It takes years. So everybody can actually calm down, and we get conclusions.
We're very good at that, the British.
You're very good at that, and it's a sort of national... It's a catharsis exercise, and actually, in the end, it doesn't change anything. They had an inquiry, Livingston inquiry.
Bloody Sunday inquiry.
And it doesn't change anything. And so now we're going to have a second public inquiry on a first public inquiry.
You're right.
Well, listening to that, you know, the reputational damage to British police might have been internally quite large, but if you look from outside, British bobbies is still the model of, you know, well, good behavior, civilized behavior, particularly if you are a tourist and you are lost somewhere in central London.
Oh, they are wonderful.
They are wonderful. They are so cuddly. You know? But I'm looking at this inquiry, as shameful as it is, from the perspective of somebody who had to report a lot of police brutality in Ukraine, because if police actually beat up the victims of crime, and there is a lot of extortion, and the head of police interior ministry has in the last couple of years been a political appointment, so there is no law and policing as such in the Western sense. So it will need a reform. It will need a big reform, because still it remains a political, and the distrust to police is the largest probably in Europe, in Ukraine.
And my first visit as a student to New York City, I went up to a police officer to ask him for directions somewhere, and I cannot say on television what his response was. Let's put it this way: I had to make my own way. It was broadly. It was memorable.
I think that while I would in no way justify what's coming out about the Metropolitan Police here, it is important to put it in context. Even in other Western democracies, we see these scandals. New York is filled with them. The sheriff of Los Angeles resigned recently in a scandal. We've got a huge scandal of police corruption in Philadelphia. You know, I think there are two ways to look at this. One is, of course, the horror of the abuse and the violation of the Lawrence family's privacy and the systemic racism. But the other is that we are entering an era of transparency, and that transparency, partly through cell phone videos or mobile phone videos and cameras around our world, means that police can't quite make up what they used to make up. And I think that's the good news is, in a kind of twisted way, it is good that this has come out and we are hearing about it. But of course, if we have another inquiry that takes 5 years and we have new leaders in Downing Street, inevitably there is the concern that nothing will change. But clearly these things now are out in the open, and they can't be put under the carpet the way they were.
Okay, well, finally, medical experts, including the World Health Organization, have declared